Mr. President.
Yes, Ricky.
I'm grateful for the information you have shared with us. It's a lot of information, but it's quite typical of the presentation you offer on these occasions. It is a very depressing report, I must say, in terms of the future, economic future of this region, and given the high level of unemployment and incidence of crime. I would therefore like to begin by asking two related questions. How many governments, either through their central banks or the Ministry of Finance, have been in communication with you during the past year on how best a partnership, a more effective partnership with the CDB could be pursued with a view to the point you alluded to earlier, that is accessing resources that are so very vital. I'm asking that because I get the impression from following reports in the region's media, with which I am a participant, is that we hear a lot about initiatives between a government and the IDB, the World Bank, and the IMF, as if the CDB, which is the region's bank, does not really matter. Yet you have reported to us a heavy dependence on your limited resources. So I will stay with that for now.
Okay, thanks for that question, Ricky. Let me preface my response by saying that it is sometimes a caricature of CDB's operations and our role to suggest that we are only in the business of providing financing. Our offerings go way beyond just money. In fact, what we find is in these circumstances where our countries find themselves, they have a difficulty borrowing because of the indebtedness scenario that I outlined in my presentation. So that in many respects, what they're doing is they're taking the opportunity to struggle with the very vexed question of how do they fix their internal affairs? How do they address fiscal problems? How do they address indebtedness? How do they improve the capacity to run their governments better? Taxation issues. And CDB has been at the table with those countries in these types of discussions. We have played a very pivotal role. I think we mentioned it last year, and we have continued to work with that country. I'm talking here about St. Kitts Nevis in addressing their debt problem. In fact, at a recent conference in Trinidad and Tobago, one of our economists who was on that team that dealt with the St. Kitts Nevis issue made a presentation on the approach that was used by St. Kitts Nevis and the role that CDB played in helping them to resolve their debt issues. And it was very well received at that conference. I'm speaking here of Mr. Ian Durant, who's in the back, who was the economist who spoke at that conference. So that we have a lot of value-adding work that we are engaged in. And, whilst we're very happy to see loans on the books, we don't want to put our countries in a position where we're deepening the problem of debt for them. We're not commercial bankers, so that whilst we recognize the importance of providing them with resources, we don't want to provide resources just at any cost. The importance of the climate change discussion here, and this was the punchline I was trying to deliver in my closing remarks, is that not only does a pursuit of climate resiliency enable us to be more able to withstand the natural hazards associated with climate change. But it also represents an opportunity for infusion of resources in the construction sector, because many of the adaptation projects involve infrastructure type projects, building up sea defenses, reconstructing gullies, waterways, things of that nature. This involves infrastructure, so it involves employment creation for our people. But also, on the other side, the fuel switching side, the availability of resources at low cost to enable countries to pursue those initiatives help them now to introduce investments that can be of a game-changing nature. I'm thinking here about Dominica, for example, with its geothermal potential. Many of the OECS countries now are, there was some feedback. Yeah, many of our countries now in the OECS are recognizing that they have geothermal potential. Once those resources can be developed, and if interconnectedness can be achieved between those countries that have low-cost energy and those that don't, it represents a game changer for our region. So it's not all bad news. That is what I'm trying to say, Ricky. And that is one of the reasons why we are pursuing so heavily this climate finance issue. There's a lot in it that can create a different picture than the one that I seem to have been painting in my presentation.
Could you permit me a follow-up to that for now? Are you then saying to us that whatever disappointment there may have been, you are satisfied or encouraged by the level of dialogue taking place between the bank and its member governments?
Absolutely. We want to deepen that engagement, but in the OECS, we have been working with the OECS countries in trying to strengthen their financial system. We have been in discussions with the government of Jamaica around their own issues. There are several initiatives that are underway where we are engaged with our countries. So there's no absence of dialogue. I mean, maybe we don't get on the mountaintop and trumpet it, but that work is going on, and it is as important work as lending to our countries.
Change in the Caribbean help? And I don't ask that in the narrow sense of whether it's the DLP or the BLP or whether it's the PP in Trinidad or the PNM or JLP, etc. But I'm talking about the importance of politics to the economics of the region and the kind of change, and you don't have to change political parties for the kind of, maybe you do, change the kind of political approach that is required. So that's a context that I'm asking the question. Is political change required for economic advancement?
Well, one of the things that we do know is that good policy is good for economic growth and development. Good policy. If better policies emanate from a political change, then it's good for the country. But if the change leads to retrograde steps in relation to policy, my simple answer to you would be no.
So the larger question is, even within political regimes, existing political regimes, is there a need for a political orientation that is different to get the kind of economic development that is required? I mean, I don't want to go on, but we could take it into the realm of the CSME and the lag on that institution that is happening. And politicians themselves now are taking blame for that. Far more for me blaming them.
Yeah, I understand where you're going, but I don't want to go with you, to be very honest.
I was just going to ask you if you want to come along.
I would like to leave it the way I put it earlier, that good policy is good for the region. And to the extent that good policy flows from political change, we at the CDB are 100% behind it. Frequently, you see governments change. They get an opportunity to go into the wilderness, so to speak. They have an opportunity to rethink. As we Jamaicans say, they wheel and they come again, and it's a better story. So I don't have a problem in principle with political change. But political change for its own good, no. It must be accompanied by improved policy environment.
Let me ask it in a different way then. Is the current attitude, the current political approach, hindering economic development?
Well, that's very broad. That's very broad. I wouldn't want to be making any such wide political statement. The policy framework that exists in the Caribbean differs from country to country. Some countries have good policy frameworks. Some countries have policy frameworks that need improvement. And our business is to work with the country of the day to try to encourage them to move towards an improved policy framework. And we do that not only on our own, but we also do it in collaboration with the other institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the IDB, as Ricky alluded to earlier. I have learned that. Thank you. Sorry, I think Ian Bourne was trying to come in before earlier.
Yes, sir. Ian Bourne, BajanReporter.com. You spoke in your address of the fact that youth like to embrace new technology and that they are an avenue for the way forward for growth in the Caribbean again. I was wondering, how will the bank, how will CDB, in other words, when they're dealing with their member nations, be implementing or making sure that governments implement such a move with concrete steps, not just theory, but actual reality?
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. I'm going to ask Tessa Williams-Robertson to speak to that. There's a citizen security initiative that, oh, Deidre is here? Yeah, sure. All right, sorry, Deidre, I was looking for you, hiding in the back. Would you like to speak to the citizen security initiative along the lines of what Mr. Bourne is asking? You need a microphone? Oh, you didn't hear the question. Ian, would you like to just repeat it?
Yes, Dr. Smith in his address had spoken to the fact of being that youth within the region are very quick to embrace new technology, that they are seen as an avenue of resuming, re-strengthening growth. I wanted to know how the CDB, in dealing with its members, would ensure that such a move is not just a theory but becomes reality. Where does the CDB see itself as positioning not only itself but the region's youth and technology to carry us out of this slump?
Yeah, I think we can focus on two approaches. We have given renewed focus to our technical and vocational education and training, and we are working with several of our CARICOM countries and CARICOM itself through CANTA, which is the agency responsible for training. And through that, we are working as well on our national curriculum frameworks, where we are saying that there should be portability of certification across the region. That is, there is currency to any kind of certification, particularly skills, because we recognize the importance of skills to the development of our region, the relevance of skills as well. So we are focusing our involvement with our member countries on ensuring that skills are relevant, doing the labor market research, ensuring that whatever we do within our school system and outside of the formal school system is infused with technology. We recognize that even the way our teaching is taking place within the schools, that our children are technologically savvy and the teachers are behind. So that is one area of focus for our interventions in education project, especially education dealing with skills training. On the other aspect, where Dr. Smith spoke to our initiative in citizen security, and our focus of that initiative is really on the school system. We recognize as a development bank and that we should take the approach which is really looking at preventing crime and violence, the kind of more preventative approach. So we're looking at how do we engage with our young people before they get to the point where they are either a victim or a perpetrator of crime. And we want to work closely within the school system to ensure that we put in the kind of services to our young people, those who are at risk, who are deemed to be at risk of committing a crime, to give them the kind of support that they will need, not to ensure, because I guess one can never ensure, but to make sure that they are given the wherewithal to deal with any situations as they arise. The citizen security as well, we are looking at it in relation to not only those who are at school, but those who are already out of school, those young people who have committed crimes, and how do we rehabilitate those young persons? How do we make them become productive citizens? And that is another area of focus when we're dealing with our young people.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. Incidentally, Deirdre Clarendon is our portfolio manager, social sector division. Thanks, Deirdre. Yes, Ernie Sion had a question.
Yes, since you introduced me, I don't think I need to do that anymore. I'm interested in the downgrade issue. You preferred not to talk too much about it, but you didn't indicate we shouldn't ask about it. Did the downgrade actually come as a surprise? I'm asking that because, you know, I also want to find out the fact that you indicated that clearly what is going on in the economies of the islands predicated the actual downgrading. I also want to find out whether what measures can the bank put in place to protect itself in the future. So 2 questions there.
Okay, let me have a crack at a part of it, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues to help. Was it a surprise? I think it was a surprise because whilst the points I made earlier about there being an inextricable link between risk in our countries and risk in CDB, what we have done, the way in which we have managed our business, is to pursue a set of policies that are very, very conservative, and we have also always run our business in such a way that we have very, very large reserves of risk capital. In other words, how we protect against the risk is by having risk capital there as a buffer against the fallout that could happen in our countries. So that's how we mitigate it. We felt that we have adequate reserves. We had adequate reserves of capital, and that had always been the discussion that we had had with the rating agencies. I think the simple answer is, Ernie, that there was a changing of the rules in the rating agencies. They have rolled out a new methodology. Well, Standard & Poor's has rolled out a new methodology. We have been exposed to it. We have a pretty good understanding of it. And if there's any takeaway from it, is that the goalpost has been moved. That is a reality. The way in which they assessed risk yesterday is not the way in which they assess risk today. And therefore, the way in which they viewed CDB yesterday was somewhat different. Is there anything we can do about it? Yes, there are certain things we can do about it. We have already carried out some of those steps. One of the things they asked us to do was to strengthen our internal risk management. We have spent a lot of money getting expert advice on how to do that. We are in the process now of implementing the recommendations, and we're going to have a chief risk officer in place very shortly. So that is one of the responses. But there are also certain things on the operational side that we are looking at, and this will be part and parcel of our new strategy going forward. We're going to be trying to find ways in which we can diversify the portfolio such that we don't have the kind of heavy concentration risk, which has always been a feature not only of CDB, but also of other multilateral development banks. So those, in a nutshell, are just some of the initiatives that we are trying to pursue to bring us back to a position where we can improve the quality of the rating. And let me hasten to add, a AA rating isn't a bad rating. 98% of international banks don't have a rating anywhere close to that. So we're not shedding any heavy tears.
And just to follow up quickly, to what extent would you say that the decision to put the bank in that position had something to do with the failure of the member governments to take advice from the bank?
Well, well, we have some very clever members of the press here. I'm not surprised, though. Let me respond by saying that there is no question that in the new environment, in the new dispensation, the relationship between the bank and its member countries will have to become much closer. In other words, we have to be able to work much more in tandem. Things that we might have taken for granted, or they might have taken for granted in the past, can no longer obtain because they can have adverse consequences for CDB. And let me come clean because it's in the public domain. One of the things that underpins our credit rating is what is called preferred creditor status. What's preferred creditor status? It means that if a country finds itself in financial difficulties and it can't pay all its creditors at the same time, what they do is they put CDB at the head of the line. So we get paid first. That's an important part of our credit quality. So to the extent that our borrowing countries do not continue to accord us that preferred creditor position, it will redound to our disadvantage.
If I may ask a related question to that, with your permission. The credit rating issue is that how many of your borrowing members have been taking advantage of your open door policy to bring themselves up to date in the first instance in reporting before defaulting. For instance, I would like to have an idea how many, if you do not want to mention the names, fair enough, how many of your borrowing members have defaulted on loan repayments?
Simple answer, Ricky, none.
Sorry?
None. None of our borrowing members have defaulted. Some have been late, but none have defaulted.
That's good to hear.
Yes.
Mr. President, Ricardo Roberts, Caribbean Media Corporation. Is the CBD concerned about Jamaica's failure to seal a deal with the IMF at this stage?
If we're concerned, well, I think that we share the view of the government of Jamaica that the imprimatur of the IMF is necessary at this time to send the right signals to various stakeholders in order to enable the government of Jamaica to achieve the objectives that it has set itself. But the way we understand it, there's a negotiation that's going on. And what we understand the government of Jamaica to be saying is that they don't want just any agreement. They want the best agreement for the country. We are not sitting at the negotiating table, So we are not privy to the issues that might be leading to a more protracted negotiating process than one might have anticipated. But we are satisfied that the government of Jamaica understands that the negotiations can't go on forever. And there will be certain fallout from not arriving at a conclusion within a credible time frame. And it is my understanding that that is what the government is pursuing, arriving at an acceptable agreement, one that's acceptable to both parties, the government of Jamaica and the fund, within an acceptable time frame.
Another question, Mr. President. Belize, as you are aware, is still negotiating with its creditors a restructuring of its $500 million US debt. The Prime Minister, Dean Barrow, said that the CDB had promised to assist the country through policy-based loans to the country to bridge a major financing gap that still remains. What updates can you really provide on this?
I know in the country strategy for Belize, when it was agreed a couple years ago, had provision in there for policy-based loan. The bank, however, has reached its limit on policy-based lending. So we are not in a conversation with the government of Belize at this time about a policy-based loan. I believe Belize has been in discussion with other multilateral agencies on policy-based instrument, but not at this time with the CDB. We remain supportive of Belize, of course, in its efforts to sort through its fiscal and debt issues. Our economists are involved in those discussions when they take place with the IMF in particular and with the other agencies, but it's not a discussion at this time of a policy based in.
Right, my final question. There's a prevailing concern about the increase of taxes across economies in the region as governments, try to raise the revenue. Some suggest that this has resulted in negative returns, and they propose instead to provide what they call a targeted stimulus. Which, in your expert judgment, is the best approach for Caribbean economies at this time?
Juliet, I'm going to ask Dr. Juliet Melville, who is our Acting Director of Economics, to take that question. Juliet?
Yes, thank you very much. I think despite the different views, there is agreement on a fundamental truth. Foreign exchange is the lifeblood of the region, and export is key to its performance. The second thing we can agree on is that the crisis at the moment is one that is not of our making. Secondly, or thirdly, it is one that has gone on longer than anyone anticipated. Another fundamental truth is that the countries have very little fiscal space to pursue counter-cyclical policies. Their revenues, and this predated the crisis, and the crisis has worsened the revenue situation in these countries. What should be the fiscal stance in such a situation? If the crisis was of a short-term nature, I think the general agreement would be that some domestic stimulus would be in order to keep the economy ticking over as it recovers. In the current case, as I said before, this is a crisis of long duration. And the answer is not so straightforward. I think the other issue that is on the table, every dollar of fiscal stimulus translates into an impact on your balance of payments because of our import dependence. So the issue here is really one of balance. How do countries have the policy space that they can pursue targeted stimulus that would favorably impact our export capacity and at the same time safeguard the most vulnerable? That is the real fundamental issues that countries have to decide for themselves. So it's not simply a question of, is it good to raise revenue at this time or not? The situation in some countries may be that they have the space that they can afford to relax on the tax measures. In other cases, it may simply make the situation worse. But I think the whole situation is not as straightforward, as I said, because of the duration of this crisis.
Camilo Thame, Jamaica Observer. Regarding, well, I should say, as development banks and development agencies such as IDB and World Bank shift their attention away from the numerator, such as debt and fiscal deficit, towards denominators, is the Caribbean Development Bank considering deeper and more long-standing involvement in providing technical and financial assistance to, say, for example, small and medium enterprises in its borrowing member countries?
Yeah, absolutely. And to a great extent, that really is one of the important ways we're going to see growth eventually return to our countries through the stimulation of private sector activity. And that's not always directly by the infusion of funding. It's also by improving the policy climate within which the private sector, including small and medium enterprises, develop. There's a particular program that we have in the bank, which is our CTCS program, which is the program that Mr. Harvey, who is sitting at the back there, is responsible for implementing. That's a program that particularly targets helping small and medium enterprises address issues of productivity, management, all of the various things that allow them to become viable enterprises. There's a great demand for that program, and we're trying to expand the reach of that program to the extent that our resources allow us to do so. And Mr. Harvey likes to talk about CTCS, so if anybody wants to buttonhole him later on, he's Mr. Ken Harvey, who is the program coordinator for the Caribbean Technological Consultancy Services, which we use to support small and medium enterprises directly.
So it's not geared towards financial assistance at all at this time?
That particular program is technical assistance, not necessarily financial assistance. We would normally target financial assistance through on lending to the DFIs, where there's not a great capacity to do that at this time. We've been talking about the issue of fiscal space. Lending to DFIs in our context requires governments to be able to give guarantees. That's something we have to look at internally. Not all our governments would be in the position to do that at this time.
As it relates to diversification towards South-South trade, given that Latin America is, they have a large commodity-based economies as well as strong service-oriented economies, what specific products and services would Caribbean seek to provide to Latin America?
I think a logical one on the service side is tourism. They're in our neighborhood, so to speak, some of them, and there are now linkages, air linkages, that come from South America over Panama with an entree into the Caribbean through Copa Airlines. Copa Airlines is flying to a number of Caribbean countries now, but that represents opportunity. But once that market is promoted sufficiently and the quality of the product provided here in the Caribbean is acceptable, I see no reason why, with growing wealth in South America, especially in places like Brazil, that we should not be able to attract Latin American tourists to the Caribbean. It's already starting to happen. It's not, it hasn't reached a deluge yet, but it's beginning to happen. And much more investment needs to take place in encouraging that growth.
So which brings me to a question regarding our vulnerability to climate change and tourism. Just for clarification, economic losses that were projected 5% by 2025 and 10% by 2050, is this projection based on without intervention?
Well, let me not answer that question. Let me throw it to the two folks over there, Ms. Cheryl Dixon, who is our environmental specialist, and Mr. Selwyn Hart, who is the consultant on climate finance. Cheryl, you want to have the first crack?
Those figures are based on keeping climate change, keeping warming to the 2 degrees projected to 2050. So that is what the last IPCC report would have, the findings would have resulted in that analysis for the Caribbean. What is happening today is that the new findings from the new models, which will come in the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report due next year, is that those figures are in fact quite conservative, and that the potential impacts from climate change are likely to be worse.
The reason why I asked for clarification is because even at the 2%, 2 degree. I understood that the sea level rise would be significant enough to pretty much take care or get rid of a significant portion of our room stock, considering that it is along our shorelines primarily. So I was just wondering. No, the reason why I asked the question, I wanted to know where our targets are in terms of risk mitigation, and where we are in terms of the gaps, in terms of the borrowing member countries. And also along that lines, how have lawmakers in the individual countries prioritized these things? I mean, based on your communications with them.
Part of the difficulty is that the conversation about climate financing is relatively new. And we are engaging in that with our member states over the next, as we proceed. The 5 Cs, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, which is a scientific body, is working very closely with us. And one of the important things that the 5 Cs helps us to do is to identify those particular geographic areas where the highest risk obtains. And so working with them puts us in a particularly advantageous position in identifying where the greatest investments need to be made. Countries, however, have to put their houses in order in terms of identifying the projects that require financing. And so that's part of what people like Selwyn and Cheryl, who is our expert in environment, we introduced Selwyn before, that's part of their remit, and I would want to ask them to add to that response. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Barnett. And there is strong political will at the level of heads of government. There is agreement on a regional strategy and an implementation plan, as Dr. Smith outlined. Now, the difficulty that we have in the region is translating that political will into action on the ground. And the major concern, or one of the major constraints, it is not only a lack of resources, but a lack of capacity in country to turn that political will into actual action on the ground. So the bank is working with the 5 Cs. We have a very close working relationship with the 5 Cs, as Dr. Barnett indicated. Where we are working with member countries, given the priority sectors that have been identified: physical infrastructure, which includes roads, sea defenses, and other physical infrastructure, agriculture, water and watershed management, tourism, and the marine sector. We are working with countries to develop a pipeline to start that actual implementation work, or get that implementation work off the ground. We're working with countries to develop a pipeline, and the 5 Cs, a pipeline of priority projects in those sectors that we can then showcase to our donor partners. You had another question.
Allow me to rephrase or redirect. More specifically, given a 12-year losing 5% of our economy as a region within 12 years, when is the deadline to take action?
No, and action has already started in countries. The 5 Cs has been in operation since 2004. It has done a lot of the modeling work to analyze what type of interventions are required, and it is clear that the benefits of action now will far outweigh any cost. So it has started. It has started. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Tim, before you come in, and I think we have some other questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Just before you come in there.
Oh, sorry.
Our Director of Projects, Mrs. Tessa Williams Robertson, wanted to make a comment. Tessa?
Thank you, President. Just wanted to say that in addition to all of the work that we plan to undertake, the bank has already taken steps to include improved performance specs in the projects that we are currently designing, taking into consideration the reality of adaptation that is facing the region. So already our designs are considering that for projects that are there. We're looking at climate proofing projects that we are currently undertaking. And you heard earlier the President spoke about the community-driven disaster risk management project, which will be looking at pilot projects within the regions for disaster risk. So there are a number of initiatives in the bank already ongoing that are addressing the issue of climate change.
All right, now we all have some burning questions, but we're going to take questions from Siobhan, who hasn't asked a question yet.
Good. Good morning, Siobhan Benjamin, MTV Grenada. Dr. Smith, I've been listening to your I've listened to your presentation, and it jogged my memory a bit back to the presentation done by Sir Dwight Venner, the ECCB governor, and both speeches seem to suggest the need for the Caribbean to radically change its strategies and approaches. Do you envisage a different role for the bank going forward?
Well, our strategy changes in accordance with the needs of our region. So we don't have any fixed strategy. We do engage in strategic planning, where we outline a strategic framework within which we work, but this is not cast in concrete, so that over time, our operational plans would adjust. Those would be more tactical to reflect the situation on the ground. Right at this time, we are now beginning the process of developing a new strategic plan. And one of the issues that obviously will be before us is one that I mentioned earlier, which was how to address the concentration problem in institutions like ours. We're going to have to be very, very creative, which is one of the reasons why it's important that we have expertise like those who will be working for us in our risk management area, because we'll be able to run different scenarios to see how we are impacted by taking one or other course of action. So this is one of the issues that's going to be exercising our minds. But take the climate issue. This is something that we have had in our strategic plans before, but as we move closer and closer to the stage where we're going to be acquiring resources, I think that you'll see our strategy shift more to an investment phase as opposed to a capacity building phase. That is part of my expectation. I mean, the two will probably run parallel for a while, but for sure, we want to get to that stage where we start to play a much bigger role in helping the countries to adapt to climate change. So that is going to loom large in our strategy, as I can see it. I mean, we haven't gotten to the point where we have articulated the strategic direction, so I don't want to presume what might come out of it, but just from where I sit, these seem to be naturals going forward.
Is there anybody else who hasn't asked the question and would like to do so? Turn the mic on, please, Nadia.
Nadia Branco, Barbados Advocate. Dr. Melville, in the last press conference, you mentioned in terms of the bright areas such as Guyana, persuading them to up their business with the CDB, and therefore it would improve the prospects. The prospects should increase in parallel. I was wondering if this was a step that has been taken or the CDB is planning to take.
Thanks for the question. We are in the process of finalizing our country strategy for Guyana. This we expect to take to our March board. And in this country strategy, it will outline a program of assistance or a program outline a number of areas in which the bank will work together with Guyana to support its development objectives. So something is happening, yes.
Also, in terms of Barbados, I'm a bit concerned because you mentioned obviously the UK and the US markets, and the UK, we're dependent on that market. You mentioned the diversification strategy in terms of going into Brazil, but it seems that we're talking a lot of long-term opportunities or long-term strategies. I'm wondering, in terms of Barbados, what do you think can be, or what would be your suggestion as an economist, what can happen now?
I will attempt to answer, but then I'll also ask my colleague, Mr. Carl Howell, who is directly responsible for overseeing Barbados, to say something about it. Yes, the Barbados situation is a bit worrying because when you look at the information on tourism, the tourist arrivals are lagging behind that of the region. But when you put it in the context as well, that in the case of the UK, its largest market has seen some growth in its tourist expenditure, as well as its source of the tourist market. And Barbados's tourist arrival still remains depressed. There is there is grounds for concern. It suggests that there are other structural issues that are involved in the competitiveness of the sector. I'll ask Carl to.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your question there. I would perhaps say to you that the biggest problem facing the Barbados economy is really one of debt overhang and one of a difficult fiscal profile. Before the country could really take off, I think it has to pay urgent attention to that. We've had involved conversation with the country as to some possibilities as to where it can go to treat with the debt problem. But I think one of the earlier questions that we had was to what extent political type economy questions weigh on development. And I think it's a rational question. I think it's a good one. Look, difficult choices that need to be made in the case of Barbados. If you've got a debt overhang, you could do one of two things, right? You could adjust your revenue picture, or you can adjust your expenditure picture. I would argue that given the already difficult fiscal effort that the country is making, perhaps there's not much more you can do on the revenue side. So you need to turn your attention to expenditures. And where do you turn to? Well, you need to look carefully at recurrent expenditures. And in there, we've got perhaps three items that we can look at. You can look at goods and services, you can look at wages and salaries, or you can look at transfers. Huh? And we've argued that perhaps the whole issue of loss-making public enterprises is something that the country may have to pay some attention to. The way that it treats with education financing is something that they may have to pay some attention to, without saying that they may go in one direction or another. But the country would have to pay urgent attention at fixing the fiscal dynamics in the country before the country could go forward in any quick fashion.
St. Lucia.
Morning and thank you. My name is Shannon LeBon from the Government Information Service of St. Lucia. Mr. President, in your presentation, at the latter stage of the presentation, when you spoke to the topic of renewable energy and you gave the example of Dominica, you mentioned the need and the importance for our BMCs to promote greater synergies in the way that they do things. I want to ask you, and I know that there's been some successes at the OECS level in as far as the procurement of medical services and medical supplies. What role can the CDB play in extending your various programs to the various borrowing member states to ensure that they can promote that sort of procurement approach, greater synergies, which in the end could lead to more efficiencies and less wastage?
Well, I wouldn't want to deal with a specific example about procurement, but if we could stay with the energy one, there was a very, very important study that was done by the World Bank some years ago, which looked at this whole business of interconnectedness of different electricity systems across the Caribbean. And I felt, and I still feel, that this is urgent business that needs to be pursued with a regional approach or sub-regional approach. There is benefit for everybody if we can take approach it in that way. Here's what I mean. Let's take Dominica. The current plans, as I understand them in Dominica, are that once they develop their geothermal potential, they're going to focus initially on supplying the domestic market. That would be a game changer in my view, because it would lead to dramatic reductions in the price of electricity in Dominica, or it should. Dominica has enough potential to be able to become an exporter of energy, but because of the nature of the energy that they'd be exporting, they'd have to be connecting to the grid of some nearby Caribbean country. Right now the focus is on the French islands, which have good demand and they're in relatively close proximity. I think a model like that is one that could well be pursued by other countries. I understand that a country like Montserrat, for example, has geothermal potential. If we can envisage Montserrat being a producer, Montserrat doesn't have very much internal demand, and it's unlikely they ever will because of the circumstances of the country. But there are several Caribbean countries in close proximity to Montserrat, which could be represent markets. But it can't be done by Montserrat alone because of the fact that you have sovereign countries that need to be players in this whole undertaking. So that it requires a multi-country approach. I think that CDB can play a role in catalyzing those kinds of developments. We have expertise. In fact, we have Ms. Alison Davis here, who is, I'm speaking like I'm a power engineer, but I'm just stealing Alison's thunder, because really there are true possibilities here for creating game-changing outcomes as a consequence of taking this type of approach.
My final question to you, sir. In the years to come, what efforts are afoot at the CDB to secure cheaper interest rates for your borrowing member countries?
Yeah. Well, that has always been our mandate. Right? Every time we go to raise funds for the bank, the battle is to get the cheapest possible rates. That is also tied up with the whole issue of risk and the management of risk and the rating of the bank. So that there is work that is ongoing to strengthen CDB, to make CDB more attractive to investors. Plus, we are also pursuing initiatives with other multilateral institutions with whom we have a relationship. And we are optimistic that prospects could come out of those discussions that could lead to improved pricing for our loans.
Thank you for holding, Ricky.
Mr. President, I was waiting a long time to ask two related questions. I benefited a lot from the questions raised by my colleagues, but help me to understand two things. One, in your opening statement, you mentioned that at least 7 MBCs debt levels have become unsustainable. In the context of our role to keep the public informed, could you kindly identify those 7 countries, because they mean there's more than 50% of member states of the Caribbean community. The second question has to do with the Caribbean Growth Forum. And you mentioned that a new initiative has been taken to involve the youth in the conversation. And this is very commendable because of the percentage of the youth population in the general population of the community. But I'm accustomed to the narrative, as you would be, that the most vulnerable in our societies are women and youth, with crimes and poverty and etc. They haven't fallen off the radar by any chance, but what are the mechanisms for involving both segments?
Well, just in respect of the first one, Ricky, the first question about the data on the indebted countries, it's not a secret. In fact, the chart was on the thing, so we can make that available to you, right? On the issue of women, I think I'm going to also ask Ms. Clarendon to speak to that. Oh, is Ms. Clarendon the best person to? Oh, Denise is here. Sorry. All right. Denise, would you like to speak to that question? Please identify yourself when you take up your position, Denise.
And the question is, what are we doing around involving you?
Identify yourself, please.
Women. Yeah.
Identify yourself,
Myself, Denise Noel DeBeek. I'm the portfolio manager consultant with the Basic Needs Trust Fund. The bank has a policy and strategy that is focused on gender equality in the region. And we are at the point of really accelerating the actions to be taken across the bank's portfolio and its operations. This means that the bank would be looking at how it integrates concerns around women, and of course, where through an analysis there would be an opportunity to focus on the interests of young men particularly, adolescent girls, and whatever is shown up, women in indigenous communities and so on, through country strategy papers, through sector strategies, and of course through direct investment where the need arises. In addition, the bank has already begun the approach to do that kind of analysis through country gender assessments. There are 10 that we are supposed to do within a particular time frame. 3 are already done. I don't know if you want us to name the countries, but 3 are already done. And of course, that work to move that forward into government policy and into sectors and have the investments is ongoing and critical work for the bank at this time. Yes?
I've asked the question very badly.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to get, I know that the women would remain a focus of the CDB in regional development. What I'm trying to find out, what is the qualitative difference in this new initiative for the Growth Forum? I nearly said the Prime Minister. The President has found it necessary to point out that for the first time they are targeting the youth and they're getting them actively involved in the conversation. As an aside, I said I know that the women have not fallen off the radar because they'll remain there, far too with significance. What I'm trying to find out, what kind of mechanisms, new mechanism or new initiative or new approaches are being pursued by the Forum Group in order to bring about this qualitative change, because your report is going to be very decisive when it is presented, because that is the only new initiative I know about within this region for a long time.
Okay, Ricky, my apologies. I misunderstood the focus of your question.
Maybe I framed the question badly.
Yeah, okay. We're going to ask Mr. Carl Howell. Carl is our representative on the Caribbean Growth Forum. Right, Carl will respond.
Thanks a lot, President. And thanks for your question, Ricky. I mean, I would respond in the following manner, by asking, how is policy normally articulated or formulated? What the Growth Forum does essentially is to try to bring non-traditional voices and actors to the table around policy dialogue, policy formulation. The way that we've configured the Growth Forum is to have a very active constituency in the youth to try to sift their views, try to glean their views as to what they see as the critical areas to be addressed to push development. We've had so far around 5 meetings in 5 different countries, because the way that is panning out is that we're having what we call multi-theme single country dialogues, where we take into various countries 3 major themes. The ones that we're talking about now center around skills and productivity, the investment climate, as well as the private sector. No? And what they're doing, the youth, they're saying to us, well, here is our view on development. Here is how we believe we can assist the process. And that view is documented and rolled up into an action agenda for countries to implement over a time phase period. So it's really incorporating in a very ostensible manner the views of the youth.
All right, we're going to get a question from Julian Rogers.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask the President if he would return to the area of growth, because he identified a number of solutions to change that picture where we see Guyana and Haiti at 5% and everybody else falling way down the line, including Barbados and Grenada and so on. You particularly focused on the matter of widening the geographic linkages. Now, I know that you're talking about reaching out to emerging markets, emerging countries, so to speak, but we seem to have a reluctance in our English-speaking Caribbean to really realistically and consistently deal with people who don't speak English. And I wonder if in encouraging the countries to go that route, the bank is going to provide some kind of encouragement, financially of course, to be able to get people up to speed in terms of making this outreach, because this is critical. I mean, there's nowhere else to go if we don't learn Mandarin, Chinese, or French to deal with our French people next door, although they speak better English than many of us right now. We have the Dominican Republic in the grouping, but we really don't do much of contact with them. And we have Haiti right there, which is showing significant growth. I mean, obviously based on the reconstruction effort and so on. But there clearly is a need to remove this barrier, reduce this barrier over time. And I wonder if the CDB is going to be driving that effort, or are you going to drive that through another agency within the region?
Well, let me just say, first of all, Julian, that one of the things that we have on our strategic horizon is broadening the membership, the borrowing membership in our bank. And some of the countries that we would want to target are not English-speaking countries, which is not to say that we don't already have a multilingual membership in our bank, because we have the 3 Latin countries of Venezuela, Mexico, and Colombia. We also have China, although the director speaks English at our board. We also have Haiti on board, which is one of the reasons why we have invited Haitian journalists here to this meeting. And we're very happy that Haiti is in our membership. Pretty much any Caribbean country is a potential target for CDB at different points in time for membership and borrowing membership. The question of incentivizing countries to trade with each other is a more difficult one. I mean, CDB doesn't have a direct role in that, so to speak. One of the things that I mentioned in my presentation was the CART Fund. And what the CART Fund does is to help countries and businesses to be more export ready. And I think that at the end of the day, language often isn't a barrier when it comes to doing business. One of the things that struck me when I went to China is that I think, surprisingly, I have often felt that this thing about making sure you learn Mandarin, the Chinese are very anxious to learn English because they see English as the language of business. But I'm not trying to be chauvinistic here. I believe in multilingualism. But I don't think that there's a direct role for CDB, to answer your question directly. I don't see a role for us in that. There is an indirect role along the lines of what I outlined, where we would be trying to help the countries and business in country to ready themselves to be able to enter new markets. I think that would be the appropriate role for an institution like us.
Ernie Sion.
You touched on the heavy dependence of the member countries on fuel, and there's also the issue of the debt situation, the debt portfolio. So with these 2 issues in mind, I'm tempted to now ask you about the move by a number of Eastern Caribbean countries to join the Petro-Carib initiative. The arrangement is stacked against the countries dealing with the debt portfolio. It's actually a situation where you defer payment, so therefore you increase your debt. Given this concern that the bank has about the debt portfolio, is this a move that the bank will continue to encourage or recommend to member states that they go in that direction?
Well, we're not encouraging our countries to do anything like that. I mean, they're sovereign countries and they have a right to make those decisions on their own. My reaction to whether Petro-Carib is a good or bad thing is it depends. It depends on how you utilize the resources. One of the possibilities on the Petro-Carib is to use the savings to finance renewable energy. That is one of the uses of it. So that if you can take those resources and put them into productive investment, then it is not necessarily a bad outcome. But I'm speaking with caution here because I don't believe that there's any clear-cut answer to your question. It simply depends. But I do know that in the agreement there are possibilities for making investments that can redound to the benefit of the country.
Ian Bourne.
Yes, Mr. President. In further looking at the growth, and I don't think this one necessarily applies to youth, but I was wondering, is CDB looking to incentivize for any member country to develop mobile applications, be it Android, be it Apple, Samsung, or whatever, something that not only pertains to the Caribbean but can have a global viewpoint?
I think I can safely say, Ian, that at this point we don't have any such project. But it is my understanding, having spoken to a minister in one of our member countries, that in that country they see this type of initiative as something that is ideally targeted at young people because of their proclivity for technology and their creativeness, the same point I was making earlier. So that I could see the possibility through the citizen security program, for example, that Deidre Clarendon described, in our engagement with youth in that kind of an initiative, that the possibility could be that creative developments of that nature could emerge from a CDB involvement. Not that we'd be producing it directly, but we would create the environment within which those kinds of things could emerge. Oh, yes, I'm being reminded here, incidentally, that at our annual meeting in Trinidad and Tobago 2 years ago, that we have a youth outreach program as part of our annual meeting activities, and that there was an apps building competition in the context of the vibesing exercise. So that, yes, I actually forgot about that one. But it actually was in Trinidad and Tobago where I heard about the interest in trying to get young people to develop apps for the small systems.
Tony?
Mr. President, I think your reference to the projects or the possible projects with Energy Dominica and the other one with Montserrat invited this question. And it's one that does not really come from me. It's all of the significant economists around the region have been saying for decades, including the ones on your wall, that, you know, when individual countries attempt, and not that there isn't space for individual countries to do their own development, but the real significant development has to come in the Caribbean when we do the things that we've talked about for all these decades. So I want to invite you, as you invited me, to explore and tell us what has happened with the SME and the CSME and where the possibilities, where the private sector is sufficient policy direction being given to the private sector to take up possibilities? Are the politicians behind or not developing the framework for it to happen? Because it seems to me, not to me, but to people like those on your wall, they are the ones who have said that for the Caribbean to go forward, the resources of the region have to be combined. So, your thoughts in that direction, and what has happened or not happened? All right, in.
Well, I don't think that the arguments in favor of a more integrated Caribbean economy are any less relevant today than they were when the gentleman on the wall first promoted and articulated them. I think they're very much current. The difficult part of the question that you posed is what is the reason why we haven't reached the aspirations of our former presidents. I'm speaking here of Sir Arthur Lewis and in particular Willie Dimas. I frankly do not think we would have the time in this discussion to be able to explore that issue to its fullest. But all I would say that I am sure that the political issues loom large as far as candidates for blame. And I think that hopefully the example that has been set by the OECS countries who have made very good progress in putting some of the institutions for integration in place and are passing important legislation that would enable closer integration. I would hope that the examples and the demonstration effect of success in that sub-region could inspire our leaders to move closer to what has been outlined by certainly Willie Dimas and others as far as Caribbean economic integration is concerned.
What of the private sector?
Well,
Are they up to scratch? Do they have the capacity? Are they driving?
Well, I think that the private sector is way ahead of the politics. I mean, there are many, many Caribbean countries who are getting on with the business of integrating. You know, there are many Caribbean countries that are investing across borders. That brings with it its own set of risks. You know, when companies become multilateral, if they're not properly regulated, they could bring risks that could undermine the benefits that were anticipated in the first place. But that should not daunt us, because we know what we need to do. We need to put proper structures in place to encourage the growth and spread of Caribbean businesses across the region. So that I don't think the private sector is the problem necessarily. I'm not suggesting that the pace at which cross-border investment by Caribbean companies is taking place is adequate, but perhaps if some of the other things could be done to smooth the way, some of the things that are being done in the OECS, for example, could be done to smooth the way, then you might see greater cross-border investment take place in the Caribbean.
The president is being that they propose. You know about it, but I think you're being very generous and I can understand. I say that because very often we in the media flag the governments repeatedly. And sometimes I wonder why there is a reluctance, by accident perhaps, that the private sector gets away with it. They have the intellectual and financial resources. They have the experience. I can't tell you that. You know that. Why is it that they are not more forthcoming at this particular time when the region as a whole is in crisis? Very rarely, other than two leading entrepreneurs in Jamaica, who I will not name, have they come forward with any new ideas or initiative. They are in a blame game. And I think that it is time that the private sector, I'm grateful to my colleague from Trinidad for raising it, that they be more forthcoming. This is not a problem for the CDB. I'm merely expressing a view because it's a surface. Unless the private sector of this region awaken to their own responsibilities, we are going to be remaining in our rut. But I'm looking forward to the report from the forum, because I'm sure they'll have some harsh thing to say about the private sector.
All right, Ricky, I won't argue with you on that one. I'm not here to defend the Caribbean private sector. But I think that there are some objective realities that would militate against the type of the type of spread of Caribbean business across the region. One of them simply is logistics. You know, that is a big, big problem. And that is something that the Caribbean Growth Forum is going to be wrapping its head around. And that's just one factor. The integration of the financial policies and things of that nature are some of the other factors. The issue of ensuring that there's a coordination of regulation across the region is another one. You know, so there are a raft of different factors that, if put in place, would, I think, lead to greater cross-border investment by Caribbean countries. But that's a big topic.
Do they have the sufficient of the capacity for risk-taking and entrepreneurship?
That will be our final question.
Sorry, you're making a comment.
No, I'm asking you.
Could you repeat it?
Does the private sector in the region have sufficient of the entrepreneurship spirit and the risk-taking capacity to move forward?
Well, I think there are some very good examples in the Caribbean of that. So it's not as if we haven't demonstrated that kind of capacity. Do we have enough of it? Perhaps not. But I think we also, as a region and as individual countries and governments, have a responsibility to create the environment within which that kind of entrepreneurship can flourish. I think it's a very, very good move that the CXC has now introduced entrepreneurism, or entrepreneurship, I think is the word, into the curriculum for CXC. I think that is a move in the right direction. You know, it's very interesting because certainly in my parents' generation, if children grew up and wanted to be business people, they were regarded as the dunces in the family. Those who went and pursued the professions were regarded as the smart ones. Those days are changing. There is now prestige associated with being an entrepreneur. It's growing, the prestige is growing. And many young people want to pursue that avenue rather than doing what people like myself did. I think in retrospect I made the wrong career choice, but you know, I think that I'm not as pessimistic as you, Ricky. I think that we have some good entrepreneurs, and they have built fantastic businesses, and that is true across the Caribbean. But we don't have enough of it. There needs to be an explosion of entrepreneurship in the Caribbean, and the youth and the women need to play a pivotal role in that. I saw some statistics the other day in my own country, and they were referring to the number of female entrepreneurs, and it was quite impressive. You know, women are stepping out and leading the way in entrepreneurship in the Caribbean, and I think that's a very good sign.
That final comment is that you have read my anticipation about the forum's report in terms of pointing the private sector, to the challenges that they have to face in helping to resolve the problems we face across the region. Because why I'm asking that is that I am aware, as you would be much more than I am, that a emphasis very often focus on governments, and the private sector benefit from that perception. So I am looking forward to the forum's report with a lot of...
Thanks, Ricky.